Okay, dreamer, please.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. So I'm sure many of you have been receiving the time chest from Dev Kagura over the past few days, and today we're gonna have a Dark Knight jewel. So just to give you guys a heads up, we're gonna get even better jewels like the 7 Knights of O1 tomorrow and the Fallouts and Dark Knights Myth jewels in the next upcoming days as well. So in case you guys are still wondering, especially for newer and returning players, you guys are not too sure what to actually pick, I'm here to guide you, okay? But before that, we are also going to talk about the first few days, just in case some of you guys have not actually touched the time chest, which is located in the bottom left corner of your screen. For the sake of all players, I have decided to split the recommendations into 3 categories, mainly the new players, the returning and progressing players, and the veterans, so that this is a lot clearer and you can make better choices with this, okay? Basically, you're gonna get a Fallout and Fallout of Old Selector, and because it's a combined selector, this is why it makes it even more important to make the right choice, because there are many options. So for new players, you should go for one speed jewel, and if you already have that or you think you can get this from another place, then hold on, and we'll talk about the Fallout of Old options in a while. And then for the returning and progressing players, you will have probably already have your speed jewel, so that is why you can start looking into damage reduction jewels for block purposes, and also recovery skill jewels, which increases the healing capability of certain heroes that actually do heal. You can also look into basic attack, because in the long run you will be attempting to do brawl, and brawl will require some heroes to have basic attack jewels as well. And for the veterans, I think you're all currently building up the brawl team, so basic attack jewels are going to be very important, followed by the damage reduction from blocking jewel, because it's very useful in PvE, and also the recovery skill, which is also good for certain heroes like Fenrir, Rudy, and Jack and Clemith and all that, okay? For the Fallout of Old Jewel, which I strongly recommend you go for instead of going for the Fallout category 1, you can actually look at getting increased awakening gauge jewels from the Fallout of Old category, because that is actually very important no matter what tier you are in, and it will be used for very long term, and you will need a lot of copies because many heroes can utilize that jewel. Also for newbies, you may want to pick up one damage reflect immunity jewel and also one cooldown increase immunity jewel, because for raids you may need these jewels, or for other PvE content that's about to come, or even for PvP sometimes it can be very useful, especially the reflect immunity if you do not have a reflect immunity hero provider on your team, okay? So these are the Fallout of Old jewels recommended for newer players. Now for returning players, you can still go for increased awakening gauge, because as I said, this is the most useful Fallout of Old jewel in the whole selector. You can also go for skill use chance, because at this point you should be having some PvP knowledge, and sometimes skill use chance jewels can help to skew your RNG towards certain heroes and give priority to their skills, so that's pretty important, such as FI and ND. And then finally for the veterans, I'm also listing increased awakening gauge and skill use chance, but I've also included damage reflect immunity and cooldown increase immunity. The reason for these is because sometimes, okay, at this point, veteran level, you may want to myth awaken these jewels, you may need multiple copies. Reflect immunity and cooldown increase immunity do come in handy in guild dungeon for your DPS. And I mean, if you really want to min-max the damage, you do need mythical awakened versions of these jewels, although it is strongly not a priority, okay? So for veterans, if you still need increased awakening gauge jewels to myth awaken, go for them instead, and I think that will be a much better choice. Moving on, we have the Revolutionary Jewel. This is on the second day. So for newer players, you strictly should only go for these 3 choices, okay? And you need 2 copies of them. Firstly, one is for Valakut, and secondly, one is for May. Now for Valakut, you may also be using the increased awakening gauge jewel, which I do recommend instead. And for May, you will go with the PvE skill cooldown 1. Or sometimes May can also use increased awakening gauge, so that's why I say you need a lot of increased awakening gauge jewels. But ultimately, this combination is pretty good. Okay, skill cooldown can also be rotated to other support heroes if you no longer use them on your DPS, so don't worry about that. Same goes for the progressing players. Now, since your DPS should already be somewhat built, you should also have a couple of defensive jewels if you need. Skill cooldown is also good, especially for your support heroes, so that you can spam their skills timely, okay? And also PvE status resist. I think status resist is actually one of the most important one, and I should have put it on above PvE defense and skill cooldown, because status resist, you know, sometimes you're gonna face a lot of enemies in guild dungeon, in guild raid, in raid as well, that do 100% status casting. And I think status resist coupled with the traits is going to give you more than 100% resistance. I think it's going to help you very much, having more resistance towards all these statuses. And of course, for veterans, I still strongly suggest going for everything, because anything in fact for revolutionary jewels, because they are all very useful. And of course, prioritize Mythical Awakening your jewels for your DPS first, and once you have done that, you can go on to pick all the others. Moving on, we have the boss jewel, which is the third day. For the boss jewels, for newer players, everything is almost beneficial for you, because you're not going to come by Dark Knight jewels, you're not going to come by PvE jewels that easily, right? So, crit and lethal rate is going to be very helpful if you do need to buff your DPS's crit and lethal rate, as well as the attack of your DPS. Now, crit damage is also very good, and counter rate is good for your counter heroes, so that, you know, maybe like Seek and Ares, so that they are able to land more counters and cool you down faster, so you can clear certain bosses better. And lifesteal is kind of the last option for newer players, to be honest, because you're not going to come by a situation where you're going to use basic attacks too often. Okay, maybe only for Brawl, but then again, Brawl is not a new player kind of mode. So I would say lifesteal is least priority for newer players. For returning and progressing players, counter rate and block rate is something that you should be looking into, because once your DPSs are built up, okay, you can start looking at how to buff your support heroes in terms of giving them more bulk, giving them more counter, even for your PvP side, because sometimes you may not have the relevant fighter soul, and counter and block are fighter soul that are in grade 7, and for progressing and returning players, you do not have that level, so you may have to rely on boss jewels to buff those stats instead. Same goes for crit and lethal rate. Okay, and again, lifesteal is something that you can start to stock up on at this point, because you're gonna attempt Brawl more commonly, so it's good to have more lifesteal. And for veterans, I think lifesteal and block are the best jewels to pick from, because lifesteal is going to be very useful in Brawl, whereby you will sustain your heroes so that they can do more damage over time. And block rate overall is still very useful even in PvP, in case you do need to buff your block rate for certain heroes. For the Dark Knight Jewel, this is one of the most important selectors that you need to make a wise decision for, because Dark Knight Jewel selectors don't come by that easily. And I think it's very easy to talk about this part, because there's only two very good ones, and that is Survive on 1 HP and Crit and Lethal Rate. It's a selector, so I would say don't give up the chance to get these two jewels only, so I didn't care about the rest. Now, unless you have everything, you know, maxed out, you already have 5 or more copies of those jewels, then you may want to go for effect attack rate. That can really help certain heroes, specifically like Yonhee, Dylan, or Abel. Okay, and then beyond that, I don't see a reason why you shouldn't get more Survive on 1 HP jewels, because Mythical Awakening is a real thing, right? So getting more copies and then Mythical Awakening, the base copy each one by one over time, is something that we should all aim to do, because the mythical substats on Dark Knight Jewels is extremely good, which we'll talk about later. Now, you see that in progressing and returning players, I do put physical attack and magic attack, and this is only under very desperate attempt. The reason why I didn't put that in even for veterans or newer players is because they just come too often. At some point when you're doing your castle rush, the game is so rigged that they will keep giving you physical attack and magic attack Dark Knight Jewels only, to be honest. I haven't seen the rest drop. Maybe they give you counter attack damage, you know, which isn't the most useful. So the most useful one, they tend not to give you that easily. So you'll be getting a lot of physical attack and magic attack. So that is why, you know, unless you're super desperate, don't go for it, because it will come naturally. And finally, we have the 7 Eye of Old Jewel, which will come tomorrow on day 5. Okay. For newer players, there's only one you should pick, and that is the Lifesteal and 1 Survive on 1 HP Jewel. Okay, none others you should be picking. The reason why I limit this to only this is because 7 Eye of Old Jewels are so rare. Okay, even for veteran players who do not spend money. Okay, even for veteran players. So there's only that one that will really help you in PvP. Okay, I think the rest, even though they may be good for PvE content or just other heroes in PvP, I think this is still the best because you get a free survive on 1 HP jewel basically with the lifesteal. It's just a win. Okay, for returning players, however, you can actually look at the other options. Progressing players as well. Block rate and block rate reduction is actually very useful when you have your heroes with high block rate, and counter attack damage can really make a difference as well in your PvP. Lifesteal and survive on HP is still the top priority, the top jewel that you really want. And even if you have one already for your counter unit or something like that, you may want to get one more so that eventually you can work towards Mythic Awakening it as well. And I also bracketed the attack and defense combinations. This is decent, but I may think twice trying to get it from a selector because sometimes you do get tickets from events and these actually do come pretty easily. Again, the game, just likes to give you these ones instead of the survive on 1 HP one. So, if there's a selector, make full use of it. And for veterans, again, the same thing, but also you can start to look at skill use chance because skill use chance is more commonly used in higher tier arena, and coupled with resist rate, I think right now having more resistance is actually pretty good. So when used on the right hero, it could help. And of course, I would say whatever you already have 2 copies, just get one more. You can either use those 3 to get 1 Mythical Awaken copy, or you can just split the usage among 3 heroes, and I think that would be good as well. So now we come to the day 6 reward, which is the Myth 4-Lot Jewel. For Myth Jewels, we have to look at 2 different substats, right? We have to look at the main stat and the Myth substat. So for the main stat of the 4-Lot Jewel, you have these main stats, and for the Myth stats, they are somewhat like a couple are derived from Boss Jewels, a couple are derived from Dark Knight Jewels. So it's a mixture of pretty much everything, but we're going to focus on 4 options which I think are worth picking. Take note that when you look at Myth Jewel Selectors, which is the first time they're giving us Myth Jewel Selectors, you need to think long term. So even for newer players, you have to think long term because these jewels are going to be with you for a long time. You're not going to be, ultimately throwing them aside because they are Myth Jewels. And you're not going to be getting Myth Jewels that easily. So the first one is the damage reduction from block. Obviously the best Myth substats are the ones that are block rate and all damage reduction because this is a defensive jewel. And for defensive jewels, naturally you want to pair them up with, defensive substats. Because I would say, going with lethal or crit rate is also possible, but take note that for 4-Lot Jewel here, the lethal and crit rate that they give is not the best. They're not the highest. Okay, so I would suggest going for more related Myth substats related to the main stat instead of trying to boost a lethal rate with a damage reduction from block on one hero, and the hero doesn't even do much damage in the first place. So you are better off just building the bulk of the hero by having more block rate and all damage decrease, right? This is my idea and logic for going with these 2 preferred Myth substats. The second one is the recovery skill main stat. Again, I think for recovery skill, naturally you would think that okay, this hero is a healer. Take note that this jewel is supposed to be used on healing units, okay, heroes that can heal. So I have actually used this on my Fenrir before, with all damage decrease. I can also use this on Rudy. I can also use this on Jack. So I think the all damage decrease is actually better than the block rate one because all damage decrease can apply to heroes using block armor, can apply to heroes using HP armor. It's more flexible than the block rate one because even if you have 16% block rate increase, it won't make that big of a difference if your hero doesn't have very high block rate to begin with, right? Then we have the basic attack plus 20%. Now this is more for brawl purposes, okay, to be honest. New and returning players, I won't suggest you go for this combination at all. Unless you want to think about doing brawl in the long term, then that's possible. There's only one combination that I think is usable in PvP, and that is basic attack and counter attack damage increase, so that the counter attack damage can really be very painful because it does stack. Okay, but for brawl purposes, you will want to look at increasing your crit and lethal rate of that particular hero instead, so that when they do their basic attacks, it will contain lethal and crit damage as well. Okay, that is one thing. Take note that in brawl, effect attacks don't work, so there's no point in going for basic attack and effect attack rate increase if you want to use this for brawl. If you want to use this for PvP and you want to allow the effect attack to do more damage, then yeah, sure, go ahead, but the effect attack rate of +5 is actually pretty low, and I don't want you to have a dead substat right there. Okay? Some of you may be thinking, what about the speed jewel? Now, the thing about the speed jewel is speed itself is also a mythical substat on other jewels, which we'll look at later. So going for a speed jewel as the main stat is not the best thing, I would say, personally, because there are better jewel effects that you can use to have speed as the myth substat instead. Rather than having speed attack as the main stat and then just throwing on lethal rate or crit rate or effect attack rate increase for that hero, which means you're not getting any other effects like what you can get in the Dark Knight versions or the Fallout of Old Jewels. Then finally, we have the Myth Dark Knight Jewel, which will be on the final day. The first one I'll be talking about is the Survive on 1 HP Jewel, which is the most important jewel that you should go for. Personally, I will think that you can go for any of the 5 myth substats here. The reason being is because it can be used on a defensive hero, it can be used on an offensive hero. For an offensive hero, you naturally will want to use the critical damage plus 30% or the lethal damage plus 30%. Of course, assuming that you do have decent crit and lethal rate on this hero itself, right? No point giving this crit and lethal damage increase to a hero with 10% crit rate. Right? It doesn't make sense. So if you are very sure that this is going to be going to a damage dealer, then you can go for those 2 myth substats, which are going to be very, very game changing for you, to be honest, because I've tried it myself. You can also use this on a defensive hero and boost their defenses, boost their block rate, and reduce the damage they take. So it's really up to you and who you want to give this to. Think about the heroes on your team that are still not able to survive on 1 HP. Then this selector will make a difference to your game. The reason why I'm not recommending this to be paired with counter rate or speed attack is because, like I said, I think you're better off choosing a myth substat that will benefit a wider amount of heroes. Especially if you're a new and returning player, this is your first myth Dark Knight Jewel, right? You don't want to be locking yourself to a speed attack myth substat, and then who are you going to use that on? It's not going to be beneficial. Neither are you going to give yourself counter rate increase, because that is even more limited to certain heroes only. So if this is your first myth Dark Knight Jewel, then go for an option that will allow you to use the jewel on a variety of heroes, and then you save yourself the trouble in future when you need to switch gear between different heroes. And then the second most important is actually the crit and lethal rate one, and this you can actually use any substat. Why is this so amazing? So let me just break it down for you. If you pair it with the counter rate, your counter attacker is going to do huge damage because they're going to have decent crit and lethal rate increase, right? Assuming that your counter hero may or may not be geared with crit or lethal weapons, because usually the counter hero is geared with speed weapons, right? So this will give them additional 20% crit and lethal rate and could potentially allow you to hit harder. And having more counter rate is definitely going to be very good for a counter hero, because anti in the current meta is going to reduce counter rate very significantly. Okay. The next one is pairing it up with the 2 damage dealing multiplier myth substats. This is a crit and lethal rate increase jewel, so naturally having a critical damage increase and a lethal damage increase substat is gonna make perfect sense. Okay, but just make sure that whatever you have already had on your hero, for example, if you have a myth Dark Knight Jewel with the critical damage substat already, please don't overlap and choose critical damage again, because they will not stack. You're better off with having the lethal damage instead. So on one hero, you can have critical damage plus 30% and lethal damage plus 30%, and that will make a huge difference to your damage output. Then you have the 3 defensive ones, and like I said, crit and lethal rate jewels, can be used on any hero, but this is actually less recommended, okay? Because usually you will give crit and lethal jewel plus 20% to a damage dealer. You will not want to go use this on a defensive hero like maybe Rudy, or maybe use it on Red Grid or Ren Grid even. So it is not so recommended, but you could use this on universal type heroes like Wukong, okay, like Judas, because being universal type heroes, they can do decent damage and they also have decent bulk. So this option can actually help universal type heroes. Finally, the speed attack option. Why is speed attack possible, and why you should consider this as well? Naturally, you know that for your speed leader, they do not have very high crit and lethal rate, because you should be having speed weapons on them. And to outspeed enemies, or rather to speed tie with enemies, you need speed jewels. You need a plus 3 speed jewel on them as well. So overall, they will have the 101 speed. But since they are attack leaders and geared with speed weapons, usually they will not have space for any other damage multiplier boosting jewel. So this is a very good combination for your attack leader, because they tend to have very low crit and lethal rate, like I said. So you can consider this option as well. And then we have the effect attack plus 5% one. You realize that this combination with the speed is exactly the same as the one with the Fallout, right? Yeah, so I don't think it's the best option, but personally I use the effect attack plus counter rate one, because I think that is extremely useful on villains, Abel, Yonhee, and so far it has not failed me. Okay, so I think the first line option is a very good option you can choose as well. Then we have the counter attack damage. Now I skipped the speed attack damage one because I think speed attack damage is no longer very relevant, especially right now when the speed system is so messed up. You may not even go first, right? So no point having speed attack damage if you're not going first. Rather, you can rely on your counter attack damage. Again, counter attack damage is very specific as well. Okay, of course, naturally pairing up with increased counter rate makes so much sense for your counter hero, of course. But you have to really think carefully if you have space for such jewel, because you always will want to have a survive on 1 HP on any hero. That's one slot taken. And then you may want to go for increase awakening gauge, that's another option, or skill use chance, or you want to boost your crit and lethal rate. So all these are very good options available out there, so you will have to check the space. Whether you do have a jewel slot, you can use this in. And these are only limited to counter attack heroes, right? So the pool of heroes, the usability is narrowed down once again. So you really have to consider whether picking this option is going to be beneficial for you in the long run. Finally, we have the physical attack increase. So this is a very special situation. So this is good for heroes like Phi. If you really want to boost your Phi damage immediately, going for the physical attack increase with one of the preferred options is going to help you right away. Because physical attack and magic attack, they are considered to be one of the most usable jewels on any hero, because any hero will benefit from having more attack, unless they are defensive heroes, of course. So this is going to be a very useful jewel as well, but the thing is, like I said before, you are going to get so many copies of physical attack jewels and magic attack jewels that I don't really see a need for you to pick these if you are lacking on the survive on 1 HP one or the crit and lethal rate one. The only special case I would say is if you really want your Phi to do good damage. And for magic attack, of course, I think Eve, Yonhee, maybe Anti will all benefit from that as well. So these are certain heroes that you can consider getting this jewel for. But I won't say it's more important than survive on 1 HP and crit and lethal rate. Then there's one more question that you may ask. What about the color of the jewel? So I think this should come more naturally depending on which hero you intend to give the jewel to. Damage dealers of course rely on red jewels, but some players do give damage dealers blue jewels so that they are slightly bulkier compared to the rest in their tier. So for blue jewels, you can also give them to defensive heroes, which is naturally the case because you want more bulk on them. red and blue are the safest options, while green is slightly lacking because honestly, green's buff of HP of only 1000 is just so low that it will not make a difference in actual PvP. Okay, so go for red or blue jewels and think about the hero you want to gear and pick the right jewel for them. So that's all I have for this video. I hope it was helpful, and I think I gave a pretty in-depth thought process on all the selectors. So if you did find it useful, do give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Big shout out to my channel members DMD, Phoenix and Yamaki for the support. Stay tuned for more guys. Thank you so much and see you!